Welcome to the Miscarriage Rebellion. I'm Sam Payne, CEO and co-founder of the Pink Elephant Support Network.
And I'm Stacey June Lewis, counsellor, psychotherapist and broadcaster. This podcast is where we share stories of many Australians who have lost their babies to early pregnancy loss.
With evidence and empathy, we unpack the shame, blame and stigma and the lack of support that many face. This is a loss that has been silenced for too long. We deserve better.
We are here to normalise the conversation.
And we're here to make lasting change.
How old were you when your kids were born?
I was a late starter. I was
me too.
38 when I had my
oh.
first one, and I was 43 when I had my
Oh,
second.
bless. I was 36 with my
were you?
first and 43 with my second.
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness, this is so nice to know. Because
Yeah.
I'm 31 and I don't
pop
want
those.
kids for ages.
No, you're fine. But I would say to you, your fertility falls off a cliff, theoretically, after the age of 35.
Right.
That's a theoretical. I fell pregnant with my daughter, like, second week.
Really?
Yeah, really quickly. But then, when she was born, the obstetrician said, "You're old. If you want another one, you've got to start trying straight away." And it took us 5 years to fall pregnant. We did IVF, I had 3 miscarriages.
How many rounds did you do?
I did 5 rounds, and I fell
Liz.
pregnant twice, and both of them I miscarried.
Bless. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It was awful.
Bless.
But it's okay because
Yeah.
I got my baby.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
I had that. I lost 4 babies before I got
so
Will.
sorry.
No, they weren't meant to be. I lost 2 single babies, and then identical twin girls, and they were later into the pregnancy, but they had a syndrome they were never going to survive. Yeah. And my belief, Liz, is that when Will was born, we got him like immediately. Yeah. He was the baby we were waiting for,
right.
and so it makes them really precious, huh?
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm the first one to cry in here.
Oh no, please! It's a big thing, and it holds in your body too.
Oh,
you
it
know?
does.
It's such a challenge.
But when you get your baby, it's sort of,
Yeah.
it's all okay. Like
Yeah, of course.
washes it away.
Because they're here now.
Yeah.
It's actually good to cry about it. It's actually good to acknowledge the loss.
Well, and there's this weird thing about how it's almost like some women feel ashamed if they miscarry, which is so bizarre to me.
And you know what the hardest thing is? There's no word for the grief.
Yeah.
How far along were you, sorry?
The first 2, really quick. So, and then the third one, I was about 12 weeks along, and we'd seen the heartbeat. And that's the hardest, isn't it? When you see the heartbeat, you're like, yay, I can be excited now.
Yeah.
So,
I'm so sorry.
oh, it's okay.
Yeah, it's a
but
thing,
this is
but-
like, you got to talk about it, right?
Yeah, of course.
So that when you
And-
start to have your babies,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And nothing will prepare you, but as long as you know.
Yeah, with the twins, because I had a 16-week scan. Oh, I'm going to cry now too.
Sharing circle.
But what was interesting is at 16 weeks, he said the heartbeat wasn't there, but I could see the other one beating, and he said they had this same syndrome that he could tell from the ultrasound. I'm very pragmatic about things, so you've got no choice. It's like when people die, you've got no choice but to accept it.
Yeah.
Like you can't. There's no wishing it away. Do you know?
Yeah. I definitely feel privileged that I got to have that conversation with them. You guys are such strong women.
Oh, thanks.
Honestly, I can't believe you've been through that.
Well, isn't it funny
so
that we get
unique.
to come
To
in
talk
here
about it.
and talk about it
Yeah.
in here?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because we
Yeah.
don't talk about it enough.
No.
I mean, I can sympathise, but I can't empathise. You know?
Yes. And do you know
that's
what?
right.
You might fall pregnant and never have any
problems
at
at
all.
all.
But
Yeah.
when we get out of
be-
here,
it's good to
you
be-
can ring us at any time and
Yeah,
say,
please, yeah.
Welcome to today's episode with Debra Lawrance and Liz Ellis. I can't believe I'm bringing these 2 women to you, who incredibly generously opened up a conversation around a campfire on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here about their experience of pregnancy loss 10, 20 years ago. That in itself tells us how long these experiences stay with us, and that miscarriages for many are not just a moment in time. They are something that stay with us forever. By opening up these conversations, we normalise this experience and we challenge the false narratives. Absolutely love having Deb and Liz on. It's a brilliant episode, so let's get straight in and give you the privilege of listening. Liz, I'll start with you. It's all right. I've read a little bit about you, and I've read your fabulous book as well many years ago when that came out. And I know that you've had a heartbreaking journey of 3 pregnancy losses, and multiple rounds of IVF that didn't work out into a baby in your arms. If you could just tell the listeners a little bit more about your experience in your own words, and if we could start there, that would be great.
Sure. So when my husband and I decided very belatedly that we might like to have children, I was in my late 30s and we fell pregnant really quickly with Evelyn. So we decided we'd like to have children, and 6 weeks later we were pregnant. So, we used to joke about how we had more sex to get her out than to get her in. And, it was all very funny. And we thought that, we were great at making babies. Like, we could just do it like that. Anyway, when Evelyn was born, I went back to my 6-week checkup with my obstetrician. He said, right, you're old, so if you want another child, get into it. And I thought, yeah, all right, we'll be fine. And we started trying to fall pregnant when Evelyn was about 6 months old. And within a few months, I was pregnant. And I thought, see, what would the obstetrician know about fertility? And we lost that pregnancy fairly early. I miscarried fairly early. And I wasn't too concerned because I thought, oh, well, I can get pregnant easily. And then that's when our journey with infertility started. So it took a long time, about 6 months of more trying, and we didn't fall pregnant. Then I took fertility drugs, fell pregnant again and miscarried again. And that was hard that time. But I thought, oh, well, it just took a few drugs and off we go again. Anyway, 6 months more drugs and it didn't happen. So we moved to IVF. And I felt confident with IVF because my sister had her 2 children with IVF. So I thought, right, it's pretty mechanical, I'll be fine. But during that time, I'd turned 40 and I just hadn't given much thought to how much your fertility falls off a cliff at age 35 and then again at age 40. So we went through IVF. I did, I think, 5 rounds. Every round, really, we only ever came up with sort of 2 or 3 eggs when they were harvested. And one of my best girlfriends did 1 round and had 16 eggs. She was only a few years younger than me. So it really started to hit home. We did an implant that was unsuccessful and then another implant that was my 3rd pregnancy. And we saw his heartbeat and I started to, you start to dream and hope. Like, I'd had 2 pregnancy losses. So I thought, right, now that I've seen the baby's heartbeat, this is good. I can start to think about, names and due dates and all that sort of stuff. And we went back for I think the 12-week checkup, and the obstetrician couldn't find the heartbeat. So I got sent down to the ultrasound unit at the hospital and they were lovely, but they just said, I'm so sorry, there's no heartbeat. And really the bottom fell out of my world that afternoon because I was 42. It hit home just how unlikely it was going to be that I would have my 2nd child. And I really did grieve that pregnancy loss for quite some time. And my husband just said to me one day, so I got really angry because we'd been together since I was 20 and we got married when I was 26. And I beat myself up because we didn't preserve embryos while I was still young. It wasn't like I was looking for the baby daddy. He was under my wing the whole time. And he was like, but we had a bit on. You're winning World Cups and I was building my business. And I was like, yeah, but the technology existed. So I really did feel guilt and grief and I beat myself up for quite a long time after that. And we just got to the point where we thought we're concentrating so hard on this baby that we just can't quite get, that we're forgetting to concentrate on the baby that we do have. Evelyn was 3 by this point, and we just thought, it's just not worth the grief and it's not worth the heartache to keep going through this. So I just got to the point where I thought I was going to have the 1 child. But I think the thing that I found when I went through my miscarriages, especially with the 3rd one, is that, I was working on television. I had to turn up week in, week out and do the netball and pretend that I cared about the outcome of a game. I couldn't give a shit because I had this big ball of grief inside me. But there's no words for it because it's, it's just a 12-week-old embryo. It's not like it's you can't talk about it because there's not the words for it. So that was the hardest thing, especially with my 3rd pregnancy loss.
Yeah, 100%. I relate. The lack of language that we can use to describe our experiences is something that's still lacking now. And often we get met with the at least because people try and make us feel better as well.
Yes, at least you've already got one.
Yeah.
At least. Yeah, right. Shut up.
Yeah, and what that does is there's an element of shame to your grief. We kind of then start to add shame on top of grief. And that's where it starts to really become quite isolating, because then you find yourself potentially not wanting to share as much, even when you might have shared that one time, or that time with that person that you thought may understand and it felt safe. And those tiny little comments where somebody might have actually tried to do the right thing can actually be quite, they can be quite damaging.
Yeah. And you feel torn, right? Because you feel like, well, I'm not ashamed. I want to express the grief. But then when you express it and someone says something that makes you feel like they don't understand, it's like, well, why did I bother? Should have just kept it to myself.
Yeah, you feel like you're having to explain to them how they should react. So you're trying to hold space for your own grief and also educate others in how to meet you. And it's too hard when you're in it. You shouldn't have to do that. And that's what we want to change at Pink Elephants. Deb, I've looked a little bit at your story, and I know that you had your first baby, Grace, in 1992. And then there's a gap. There's about 7 years. And then you have William in 1999. And we can see that you had your experiences of losses during that time. So if you could share a little bit about what your experience was and what that looked like and what it felt like for you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam and Stacey. For me, when I met Dennis on Home and Away, as soon as he walked in the door, I told him that we were going to head for a baby, or we weren't heading. And so he became quite clear about that. We actually had a blighted ovum when I was in 1991. That was before we decided that we were going to go ahead with anything. We were early on in our relationship. Because it was a blighted ovum, I had felt nothing about that. That's just a medical thing. Wasn't ever going to turn into a baby. And then once we decided that we were going to try, we got Grace. She's a wedding baby. She was born 9 months after our wedding, which was great. I was 36, nearly 36 at the time. And then we were both working very hard on Home and Away, so we were going to delay anyway. And then in my last year, in 1998, we decided, because I knew I was going to be leaving, we decided that we would give it a crack, and we got pregnant quite quickly. And I've been lucky, incredibly lucky with my fertility, because I've been able to get pregnant quite easily. My heart goes out to the women who can't. So we were pregnant, but of course, Liz was saying before about telling people, because we got married in secret, because we didn't want anybody to find out about, bother us. So we also got pregnant in secret as well. So nobody knew. I rang my mum in Melbourne to say we were pregnant. And so I miscarried about 12 weeks. And strangely enough, it was on a Friday afternoon at the end of the studio week. So went home, went to the San Hospital in Wahroonga on the Saturday for the D&C, recovered on Sunday and came back to work on Monday. Nobody was the wiser. So, I'm very pragmatic about these things. If the baby's not going to stay on board, there's a reason for it. But your body goes through havoc, basically, and also emotionally, because you start to hope, as Liz said, you start seeing, we hadn't even got to heartbeats or anything at that stage. And then a couple of months later, exactly the same thing happened again. Friday after, it's like my body's so professional that it knows to only miscarry on a Friday at the end of the studio week. It was really weird. So same, visit to the SAN, the procedure, recover on Sunday, back to work on Monday. Once again, nobody the wiser except for my mum. And then I finished up that year, and then Dennis and I, with little Grace, who was 6 at the time, were on tour with Melbourne Theatre Company around Australia. And just towards the end of the tour, I was really sick, and I knew it was morning sickness. I didn't even bother to tell Dennis, because I was just in a place, as Liz said, you go, why bother? And so I remember we were driving between Port Augusta and Port Pirie, and I said, you have to pull over, I'm going to be sick. And Dennis knows I'm not car sick. So I thought, oh, well, he's going to ask questions, which he did. And Grace was asleep in the back, and I said, oh, I'm really sick. It's probably twins, I joked. Anyway, we finished the tour, came back to Melbourne and moved into our house here and went to a clinic, an obstetric gynecological clinic. And it was confirmed that we were carrying twin baby girls, identical girls, and I saw their little heartbeat, 2 little heartbeats there. So, you go through, panic, twins, oh my goodness me, and it was girls. And I thought, oh, great, we've loved having Grace, so I've got more girls. And then Dad to I named them,
fantasized about names and worried about university fees later. You compose a story. And as much as we'd been cautious, I think because I had seen the heartbeat as distinct from the other 2 miscarriages, then that it became a different ballgame for me. And then, but because I was older, I was 42, the lovely obstetric doctor who was at the clinic said, look, come back for a 16-week scan. So we did, and one of the twins had succumbed, like there was no heartbeat. And so that was really crushing. Like that was, but also still in secrecy. We'd only told my mum. So Dennis and I just knew this, and we certainly hadn't mentioned it to Grace. And then the beautiful man said, because they were identical, they were probably both suffering with the same syndrome. And so we came back at 18 weeks and the other one had succumbed as well. But they had a syndrome called Turner syndrome. Only 3% of pregnancies go to term. So in some ways that also made it easier to come to terms with, because they were not healthy baby, they weren't healthy fetuses. They weren't viable. But it's still the grieving process is because what you're grieving is the future that you've imagined. And you can't, it's the same with, with the death of a loved one. If you lose a loved one early, you're grieving the future. You miss their presence. But with a baby, because you've had them in your belly, you haven't seen them or felt them, you're grieving your imagined time with them. And in some ways that's sort of harder because you don't have photographs, you don't have memories, and you don't have things to fall back on. Plus, there is an enormous hormonal impact on your body. So, 4 babies in 2 years was quite difficult. They had to be, because they were a bit bigger, there was a different procedure for their removal. So I had to wait for a couple of weeks. And the story I'll share with you is that while I was waiting for the procedure to remove the twins, I went to a 50th birthday party, and my sister-in-law said to me in front of everybody, "What's this here? I hear about you being pregnant." And we hadn't told anybody, but a young woman who'd been in the pregnancy clinic had recognised Dennis and I, and she'd rung a radio station and had won $1,000 for the best celebrity gossip, that Dennis and Deborah from Home and Away were pregnant again. And I was like, I nearly went mad with that. I was so angry, and my mum and Dennis advised not to phone them. And of course the family were none the wiser, but that we had to bear that as well. So it's, the invasion of our privacy during a really painful time was difficult. The doctor who performed the removal procedure at the Women's said to me, Liz will relate to this, he said, "Don't wait for your next period. You're not getting any younger. You may as well go straight away." So we did, and we got William. So we had a lovely, like Liz, we had a lovely success story. But my heart goes out to the women who continually miscarry and don't get a baby. So, Liz and I are really lucky. We've got our sons who came after difficulty. But yeah, as I say, my heart goes out to the women who don't have that outcome. So that's our story. And also I had acupuncture right from the beginning of the pregnancy with William. And I thought just to deal with the hormonal stuff in my body and the grief, which I believe lives in your body in a negative way. So I had acupuncture every week of the pregnancy was great with William. So I don't know if that worked or it was nice. So
Maybe that it helps, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Comment more about how it helps you cope with such a difficult time. I think we see that a lot. So I feel angry for you, really, really angry for you that someone outed you in that way. That is just not okay in any way, shape or form. Really angry. Thank you again for sharing something that's so personal. But I know that the purpose of sharing is the way that other people will be able to listen and relate to so much of both of your stories. There is so much in that I can relate to with my stories, and know that all the women that we support will. Stacey, I think you had some questions around that as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I just acknowledge all the losses and that big journey from both of you, and just sorry, just wanted to say, for those each losses, regardless of the pragmatic element of it, they happen, And that's something that, not everybody has to go through. I wanted to talk a little bit about the change of time, because those stories that you're telling us, it's a time where, whether it was a personal choice to really keep it quite private, I think obviously for the specific circumstances about the example of the radio station story for sure, but also perhaps the time of the conversation of something like pregnancy loss, and what you have noticed about any changes in that conversation. I think potentially what I've realised from my own experience is that when I've shared, and it may have been even potentially by sharing on I'm a Celebrity what you've experienced from sharing on such a big platform like that, how you've noticed the conversation may have changed if it has. I'll start with you, Liz. I think what I'm trying to say is that I suppose when I shared some of my losses, there were so many people that came out sharing theirs, say, for example, a girlfriend's mother who'd never shared, or an auntie or a cousin who had never said anything about their losses. I was interested to know whether you have seen any of the conversation change in your experience from when you had your loss to now. I'll start with you, Liz.
Couple of observations to make. One is that when pregnancy loss was something that was never talked about when I was growing up, and it wasn't until I mentioned that I had miscarried that I suddenly heard all of these stories. And one of the stories that I heard was from my she's since passed away, but my mother-in-law, and she had 7 children, and the first 6 were all 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, and then I married her youngest son, and there was 6 years between him and the next eldest, and his siblings used to call him Oops. which is funny until one day I mentioned that I'd had a miscarriage, and she said, well, I had 2 miscarriages between Jane and Matthew, and no one really ever knew that. And her daughters were like, why didn't you tell us that, Mum? And I said, well, you just didn't talk about it. Whereas now I think you can talk about it more openly, but we're still all searching for the words. So once I sort of realised that, I thought, I'm just going to keep talking about my miscarriages, because I'm in a really privileged position that I can have conversations that lots of people hear at different times. And probably the conversation we had on Celebrity was the biggest audience that I'd had for one of those conversations. And I didn't go into the jungle thinking that I would have this conversation. It just came up. And I think it was in the early days, and I was missing everyone, and I burst into tears, and I was like, I can't believe I'm the first person in the jungle to cry. But it's one of those things that I decided years ago to never shy away from. And then when I wrote my book about fertility, so if at first you don't conceive, I put the story in there, and because I just wanted to normalise the conversation. And I think there's lots of things to think about in this space. It's around normalising the conversation. It's about how we think about when we tell people we're pregnant, because you always, the rule of thumb when I was having my kids was you don't tell anyone you're pregnant until you've had the 12-week scan, and then you don't have to tell people if you've lost it. But that's just assuming that there's no way to tell people that you've fallen pregnant and then lost a baby. Whereas I think if we get the right words, people can tell that story, and it doesn't have to be done in silence. And I really admired, there's a netball player called Greta Boita, who is one of the greatest players in world netball at the moment. Well, she's just had her second child, so she might be the second greatest 3 weeks postpartum. But she had her first baby and then came back and played, and then fell pregnant again last year, and announced very quickly in the first couple of weeks that she was pregnant. And then after that, then announced that she had miscarried, and then she's fallen pregnant. But I actually really admired her for going early and announcing it, and then being quite open with her story about miscarriage. And I think, I'm 50, so the norms that I learned at sort of 20 years old or 30 years old when my friends started having kids. But I think now this younger generation are far more open to it. And I think people like me keep talking about it. It's good for 50-year-olds to talk about it, because we've still often got unprocessed grief that we carry sort of with us. And I just love that Greta was so open. She can process her grief. She can have people offer her sympathy. And part of this whole conversation, I think we touched on it before, is not just having the words to describe what's happening to you, but understanding when you're listening what the right thing is to say. And often that's nothing. It's just, I'm so sorry. That's all that needs to be said. So it's just that education component. And I feel like for me, the conversations that I have are around helping people understand the right thing to say or understand how to respond when someone tells them that they've lost a pregnancy. So I think the conversation for me personally has changed to, as someone who initially was trying to find the right words to talk about my pregnancy loss, to now trying to help people understand what the right thing is to say in response, or not the right thing, a more appropriate response would be. And now I look at younger women and I'm really rapt that being really open about telling people when they fall pregnant, and they're comfortable in saying, well, actually, I've lost this child and I'm now grieving.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is important because I think when people are in it, I know a lot of the clients, they're in it trying to re-educate and have that language conversation with loved ones. And as Sam mentioned earlier, they're buggered. They're bloody buggered. They're just trying to deal with their own stuff. So if you're in a position where you may be a little further out of that particular time and be able to then educate on behalf of, then it's such an important thing. What about you, Deb? What have you observed of those conversation changes?
Yeah, it's interesting because my mum was a nurse and I'm one of 6, and there's a gap between, she had 2 girls and then a 4-year gap and a boy, and then she had another 4-year gap and 2 girls and a boy. So from an early age, age appropriate, I guess, we knew that mum had miscarried twins between Deirdre and Charles, who are older than me, and then she'd miscarried another baby between my brother Charles and I. So we just knew about that. That was just because mum was a nurse. We always used the right terminology for stuff. She didn't train us or anything. It was just part of the conversation. So I was aware of that right through my teens about it being a thing. Yeah, it's interesting in the change of the conversation. And what I love about the way Liz approaches things is one of the many things that I love about Liz Ellis, is that she's very good at disseminating information and passing it on in a useful way that's going to be meaningful for the people who are listening. Like even, educating people in how to listen, which I think is really important. Dennis and I did an article for one of the magazines after we had William, and we deliberately talked about the miscarriages for this reason. So that, because a lot of people read those women's magazines, and that was a long time, 20 odd years ago that we did that. So we've always, from then on, we've been open about it. But I think what's interesting is that what you guys are doing is fantastic because you're giving a forum, or a place to go. People can Google and there's a place to go. If they're in pain at home, that you Google and pink elephants come up and they're on their way. They've got support. I'm an ambassador for Ovarian Cancer Australia, and it's the same. You Google and there's somewhere to go. There's a group of women who have got experience of that disease or miscarriage, and there's somewhere to go. So I think in some ways, social media and the internet have made it a whole lot easier to have the conversation. The other thing about talking about it is that you're dealing with other people's expectations of you being pregnant. Like there might be whole family members who are really excited and have told their hairdresser and they've told everybody that, Lucy is pregnant again with her second baby, or, Lucy's miscarried. And I mean, they're very free with sharing information, which they think is really great information. And so then they have to go around and say, oh, Lucy miscarried. So then the hairdresser has to offer condolences to Auntie Mary because Lucy's lost the baby. It takes a village for most things. And so often you're dealing with the excitement of the people around you as well. And you're then dealing with the grief of the people around you. You're then dealing with the inadequacy those people might feel in how to talk to you about it. So it's a big thing. So arming the women who have miscarried with huge support, huge emotional support, and also just the knowledge that people around them are going to be a bit weird, maybe. Sometimes it's nice to know if you're going through a grief process that people, and just accept that people won't know what to say and that they're going to feel a bit awkward about the whole thing. And it's also that sense of failure, that sense of dealing with that sense of failure. You haven't failed anybody. And I think that's that's what's being transmitted more now because women are talking about it. Whereas before, when there wasn't so much conversation around it, women quietly felt like failures without being reinforced that they're not failures, if that makes sense.
100%. The silence perpetuated that shame and that internalization of it and feeling that level of it's my fault because you had nowhere to share that with. And to your point as well, Deb, about meeting other people with lived experience of this, and that's what Pink Elephants offers in those safe online communities, who can say to you, it's not your fault. And for anyone listening today, I'll say that again because it's really important. It's not your fault. You haven't done anything to lead you to where you are on this journey experience of pregnancy losses. It really isn't your fault. Nothing you can do can make this happen. It's really bloody unfair. And then if we widen that out again to, yes, it's great that we've got safe spaces and online communities where people can connect and hold space and help each other through this. But simultaneously, what Pink Elephants is trying to do is to shift this narrative, is to change this conversation so it moves from those platitudes of, at least it happened early, at least you know you can get pregnant, to, I'm really sorry, your baby died. But just like Liz said, that's enough. We just want you to acknowledge our losses, bear witness to our grief, and allow us to grieve in however way that works for us, because grief is personal and individual, and no one person grieves the same as another person. And that's okay too, right?
I'd love to add to that, Sam, as well. I think we're all sharing a lot about sharing, and there is a time for that, and there may never be a time. You know, I think the conversation happening and like we're having it at the moment is super important. And I think as myself as a broadcaster, Sam, you felt very empowered, and both of you have both been very generous with your sharing. But I think it's also really important to state that that doesn't have to be your experience, that these conversations are here to connect you. And that may be that you listen to this show and that's it. And you go home and talk to your partner, or you talk to a counsellor or a therapist, and it isn't something that you want to put on your social media. I think sometimes with the conversation change, it's like we all have to have it. I think there's a time for that. And I think it is very individual. I was a broadcaster at the time of some of my miscarriages, and it was the first thing I didn't want to share, ironically. And I had shared my whole life on radio for years. And I went, oh, sure, that's what this feels like. Holding back, not sharing, because it really does it kind of stops you in your tracks a bit, or a lot. So I think it is also important to acknowledge that conversation is so important, but you can be involved in that in many ways. In many, many ways.
So we've covered off a lot about how the conversation's changing. I still don't believe it's changed anywhere near enough, and I want to see a lot more change. And I know that we at Pink Elephants really do. But I guess one of the things that we want to speak with everyone that comes on and shares their experience with us is that if there is one thing that you could change about this experience for the next generation of women and partners that go through this, if you could make that change, what would that be? Deb, perhaps we'll start with you.
Yeah, look, I love it that this is called, I've got the Miscarriage Rebellion here. You know, I can see that written down. And it's sort of, it's all part of the conversation around women's health and women's everything. Do you know that and I think that's been shut down we know, yeah, blah, blah. We can have that whole conversation about what's happened to women the last 1,000 years. But and I think the more it's talked about, the more it's normalized, and the more women feel as though it's okay to share things. Because I think we've all inherited this unconscious bias that women are not allowed to speak up. You know, that men are allowed to speak up about stuff. And there's that whole thing about mansplaining. And, you know, even as left field as watching the Matildas win, watching the Diamonds win, you know, like it's women are now going right to becoming the forefront of the conversation, and being seen as the mighty beings as we are. But it's also that we have issues that should be talked about and not hidden. Like why were periods not talked about? You know, you hear hid stuff, that whole Victorian thing about putting women in corsets and all that, like to control them. So there hasn't been a free conversation about women's bits, do you know, like women's gynecological bits, like literally about what happens in our real estate down there. all of the things that can go wrong, whether it's cancer or miscarriage or dysfunctional periods or, difficulty having sex, but blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff is never talked about. So the change I'd like to see is that it's normalized and not just women's business. That it's, men don't really have to take notice, but I want all the women who to feel free that they can talk about absolutely everything. So it's what you people are doing. It's what everyone's doing. Is just talking about it and sharing the stories. Because when you share something, I really believe the moment you share it, the grief is halved or quartered or whatever. So that would be the main thing. Just more, and it's happening anyway. The awareness, the internet has given women a voice. So watch out, fellas.
Yeah, watch out. Great, wholeheartedly. Let's normalise this conversation about pregnancy loss.
I think I just second that, and I look forward to the rebellion part being taken off, and then it's just a conversation.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're having it, but it's like we're these, which is important and needed. But it will be nice when it is. My son is talking about it in a way that isn't rebellious per se.
Yeah, women are not the enemy.
100%, and it relates to so many women's health issues, as you said, Deb. And I love that you went into the jungle for Ovarian Cancer Australia as well. Absolutely love that charity and the organisation and everything they do too.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad that Liz won for period products for women who can't afford it. Like, go us.
Yeah. Oh, seriously.
Yeah. And the great thing about that was that, Rochelle Courtney, the founder.
Oh, what a legend.
When she founded Share the Dignity, she couldn't get on breakfast television because they didn't want her talking about periods during breakfast. And then she was just like so happy because we were talking about periods on primetime TV when people were having their dinner.
Great. I want to hear more of it. But it also plays into why pregnancy loss is not talking about, right? Because of the fact that it sits in this messy Venn diagram of periods, blood, baby death. It's all taboo, and women's health and stigma. It's all interconnected. And again, the more that we normalize conversations around all of these issues, then the more that we open up support, empathy, validation, connections, all those things that we know are really important. Liz, what would you change? What would you make happen?
Well, there's a couple of things. I've always been really open with my kids about the miscarriages. So Evelyn, when she was little, she knew that a baby died in my belly. She was pretty happy to have got out alive, actually. But I didn't want them to feel like there was something going on that they sensed there was something wrong but didn't know what. And then, I've like Austin knows that some babies died in my belly before he was born. He also knows that I'm cross at him for taking his sweet time to come out. So we that's part of the conversations that we have with our kids. So I'm hoping that when they're older, those conversations are normalised. But I guess for me, it's more around a much bigger conversation around fertility, and miscarriage and fertility are linked. And when I was trying to fall pregnant, especially when I was trying to fall pregnant with Austin, the more I read, the more I realised I didn't know the first thing about my fertility. And I was in my early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. And so much of what we learn at school is around how not to fall pregnant. Everyone knows the condom on the cucumber. The teachers do and everyone laughs, right? So it's about how not to fall pregnant. Whereas I think the education needs to be about how your fertility works for boys and girls, for men and women. When do you need to be thinking about making sure that you maximize your fertility? And part of that conversation is about the really high number of pregnancies that end up in miscarriage, right? I can't remember, it was years ago when I did the research, but it's something like 1 in 3. So this is not an unusual occurrence. Most women, when you scratch the surface, can tell you either about their miscarriage or someone they know and loves miscarriage. Most men can tell you the same thing, but it has to be part of a wider conversation about fertility, about how, the amazing thing is not that something goes wrong and you miscarry. The amazing thing is that occasionally things go right. You end up with a child. So much has to happen from intercourse really for that 9 months. There's so many marks that have to be hit to end up with a child. But that conversation doesn't happen. So I think really it's about educating this next generation or generations who are at school about fertility, how you fall pregnant, what's a healthy way to do it, and then that extends into conversations around consent and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really big area that I think needs to be addressed well before you hit adulthood and you start trying to fall pregnant and then have a pregnancy loss. So it's all really wrapped up in fertility, and it's something that I talk to my children about so that they understand it, so that when the time comes, it's not a shock, right? And, I speak to my mum, and she didn't have miscarriages, but it took her a long time to fall pregnant because no one told her how to do it, right? So they just kept missing the window, I think, her and Dad. So because there was nothing that she didn't understand ovulation because it wasn't the thing that was talked about. And I still really didn't understand it until I couldn't fall pregnant. So I just feel like miscarriage is part of that greater conversation around fertility.
Wholly agree. It sits under sexual and reproductive health, and we need to have those conversations much, much earlier than what we're doing now, and normalize this as well and move from that. There's like this social narrative, isn't there, that you go to school, you go to university, you might have a little gap year and travel the world, then you get your job, and you tick, 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 you work hard at things, and then you just get married and you just have a baby. That's what we're told. And then that's not what this is for not just a few people. This is a huge portion of women and partners either struggling to conceive. It's around 1 in 6. And then obviously pregnancy loss, like you mentioned, Liz, is somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4. It's the most common pregnancy complication is pregnancy loss. So why do we know so little about it? Why do we not talk about it? Why do we not offer more support for it? Why is there a complete lack of funding support from government into this issue? There is nothing. So yeah, I agree. It needs to start much earlier and in a much broader scope as well. But I just want to say, I'm so grateful. I'm not comfortable doing these things. This is way outside of my normal comfort zone, but I do it because it matters. And I know that when we shared your story from I'm a Celeb, I'm going to get out here. It resonated so much. We got so many women messaging us saying how amazing that they're still talking about it now, that they want to make this better for women like us today. It was just, so I'm really excited about this going out and what it can do.
Yay. Oh, and I was really pleased that Channel 10 got in contact with you and, they understood. It just probably showed how far we'd come, that the producers understood that conversation, needed a bit more support around it. And I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So at the time, we didn't know. We didn't know anything. We didn't even have a watch on. That's how little we knew. But when we got out, in our post, when you left the jungle, you actually had a debrief with the psychologists and the doctor and the producers. And in the debrief with the producers, they said, look, in that conversation, they realised that it was going to raise issues for a lot of women, so they contacted you. But what else I was pleased that they did was that they contacted my husband and said, Liz has said this. Do your children know this story? This is how we're going to manage it. How do you want to manage it? And that was all good. But I was really pleased, actually, that we had been really open with our kids. So when they heard that story, it wasn't a trauma for them. It was like, oh, mum's banging on about this again. So yeah. I was actually really pleased that the care was taken. And I think that probably shows the maturity of the discourse, that it shows that where the discourse is going, and there's a maturity around that there is. That the producers who were blokes, largely, yes, or a couple of them were, understood the sensitivity around it. And the women who were producing also put their hands up and said, right, we need to do this in a way that is helpful rather than a way that is traumatizing for people who are watching and listening.
It's so good to hear. Yeah,
I was really
so good to hear, Liz.
That.
Yeah.
And
it was so good. Like, he rang me. I was at school. Imagine me. I'm at school pickup and I've got a WhatsApp call from England with the person who's on England telling me he's from I'm a Celebrity and can he mention pink elephants? I was like, what? I'm so lost. And then he was really, really good. He took his time. He properly explained. And he said, we want to make sure that we're giving a referral. We know how hard this is. And we want to make sure that if someone's watching this, they're not just triggered and left. And that just in the 8 years that I've done this has shifted. So when I first started Pink Elephants and there'd be media talking about miscarriage, there'd be nowhere, they'd like be awful, really
yeah.
clickbait story, 10 miscarriages, la, 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 and then nothing at the end. It's like, at least point people to where they can access. I think you say it in one of your interviews, Liz, that I read online, about for every article on Google that's good, there's about 10 others that are not evidence-based, that are not trustworthy, that are telling you, my aunt did this, and if you do this, if you take this miracle pill, you'll be pregnant again. And it's like, it's a minefield out there. And when you're in that vulnerable state of mind,
Yeah. But like, podcasts like this raise awareness, and you probably don't see it because you're in it. But then to see how that awareness it's since now at the forefront of people's minds, it was really reassuring that, sometimes you don't understand how far the conversation has come. And that to me was a really good example of how far it's come. I mean, it's obviously more to go. You're never satisfied.
Well, no, and it's just not so nice to hear. I mean, that was, as a radio book, we were doing it, and Sam found us when we were talking about it. We did so. I think it's also a credit to having something there to go to. I think years ago the organisations didn't exist. Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. But so nice to hear the backstory of that from just a personal perspective. Just to know that there's people that are actually having your back as well as everybody that's viewing, and not just looking at it as, oh, this will be interesting content, let's just see what happens. I'm a bit uncomfortable.
So there's care in there.
Yeah. It's called a duty of care. The Latin part of the language.
It doesn't exist. And I will say, when I got asked to do I'm a Celebrity, I was like, no, I'm not doing it. And then the more I spoke to the guys who were producing it, the more I understood that they cared about us, and they were trying to make great content and television that rated, but they also did care about us. And that's what sort of made me think that it was worthwhile doing. And then when I got out of the jungle and heard how they handled the story around Deb and I and our conversation with Aisha around miscarriage, I was so pleased. I thought, yeah, I shouldn't be pleased. That should be the gold standard, but it's not.
Yeah, that's right. I think as well, it's a story show. I think they've created conversations in the jungle, because you're camping, so it's that lovely energy that you get when you have a yarn because you've got nothing else to do. And, so then there's these things that, you have the D&Ms that they're around the campfire. I think they've created that nicely, which is, for commercial telly, bravo.
Yep, it's good. I've been really interested, actually. Lots of people have said to me since that it was a show that they could watch with their kids, and their things were handled really well, and they could then have the conversation with their kids, right? So there'd be kids who would have watched that conversation, Deb and me and Aisha, and it will be in their mind. So I think it's really good.
It also shows that you can talk about these things anywhere, right? That's what's really important about it. Not just pregnancy, also it's other things brought up that, like you said, and if our children see us have these conversations, you're normalising it. It's just something that's part of everyday discourse that it should be, right? And that's where it changes. Yeah.
People don't talk about it, but it's happening. Behind closed doors, hidden behind smiling faces. There are so many people suffering in silence right now, unable to access the support that they need and deserve, simply because they don't even know that there is support available. The Pink Elephants community is made up of people from all over Australia. Some come from the big smoke, others from the bush. Some of us have heaps of friends and family around, others have none. Some have lost babies at 5 weeks. Some had ectopic pregnancies. Some had multiple ultrasounds. Others only ever saw the 2 red lines on a positive pregnancy test. But we all have something in common. We have all lost a baby. We are all bereaved parents. There are estimated to be over 100,000 of us across Australia every single year. Please help us connect with these people to give them the support that they deserve. No one should have to lose a baby and be left on their own to navigate their grief. Help Pink Elephants support more bereaved parents. Visit pinkelephants.org.au.
Absolutely, absolutely loved that conversation. I feel like it was such a brilliant conversation that covered so much of like generations that had losses many years ago and those that are maybe going through it today from a unique perspective of women who went through their losses 10 and 20 years ago. Deb and Liz, a huge fangirl moment. They just are absolutely beautiful that want to continue to give back. They want to change the narratives. Deb talks about women's health and how it's been silenced for too long and why they both do work in this space to kind of make more awareness and support. And I just absolutely love that. Know that when we shared Deb and Liz from I'm a Celebrity, it got shared over 1 million times on our TikTok. And I really feel like it did this massive part about normalizing conversations about pregnancy loss and fertility challenges in a really big setting that hasn't been done still much to this day. So I think that was really important. So yeah, what are your thoughts around all of that?
Oh, goodness. I loved just the whole fact that this episode stemmed from a campfire conversation. You know, the actual picture of that and the storytelling elements that women deserve and can do, you know, between each other. But what we've experienced is that may have happened very privately back in the day when they were both going through these losses. And then fast forward to how many years later, maybe 20 or so years later, they're sitting around a campfire with cameras and this conversation is being broadcasted to an entire country and across the world. So I think, you know, that in itself also then add to the fact that, you know, Deb played a role of Pippa from Home and Away, who for many of us was this iconic picture of what a mother looked like. And yet all the while in her own life having all these kinds of experience of what the reality of motherhood and fertility can look like. So there were so many things that kind of sang about this conversation changing. And also I really took away, I guess, the effects of what can happen if that conversation doesn't happen. You know, research does suggest that women experiencing traumatic events during pregnancy that are related to their pregnancy is really exacerbated by the isolation, by the silence, and that can really stem out to be a much more kind of severe mental health diagnosis if not spoken about versus if it is. And so watching the shift, not only in their stories, but then they were so beautifully shared their own mothers' stories. I also shared a story around my girlfriend's mother, who is, you know, much older, even a little bit older than my mum, about, you know, I was one of the first people that she shared with her journey. And I wondered if I hadn't have shared mine, Sam, whether she would have shared hers with me, you know. So it is this really interesting storytelling element that I really received the healing. I really understood the healing of storytelling amongst generations, not just amongst women and amongst people and amongst, you know, professionals, but what it looks like to be sharing stories from different generations, women that have walked before us. You know, I really got the benefits and the healing qualities of that.
Yeah, I feel like it was that vulnerability and that led to connection and that meaningful connection. And I feel like that really helps us when we need to hear those stories. And it also then reinforces how long these experiences stay with us, because there are many things that Liz could have chosen to open up about around that campfire. There are many things that they could have talked about in the jungle, and there are many other things that they talk about. But if you remember your losses and they were 10, 20 years ago, and there's still something that is significant to them in their like history of whatever's happened in their lives that they used to share in that way, that really, really demonstrates and challenges that false narrative that a miscarriage is something that just happens for a moment in time and then a week later you're all better. Actually, no, our losses stay with many of us forever. And we will always remember those babies and those children they could have been and the lives they may have had. It's like this living with the what ifs forever. But I feel like that was just put to the world in such a beautiful way. And they're both incredible women doing incredible work, and so, so grateful that they gave us their time. And hopefully if you're listening today, you're hearing it from the same way that we've heard it. Again, you're not alone. Pink Elephants is here for you. If you need any support, everything is linked within the show notes. But yeah, super grateful for your time as always. Today's episode may have brought up some feelings for you that you need some support around. That's totally okay. Head to pinkelephants.org.au to find access to our circle of support, your safe space where you can be met with empathy and understanding throughout all of your experiences of early pregnancy loss. We're here for you. You are not alone.
If you enjoyed listening to the Miscarriage Rebellion, please help us by leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. The Miscarriage Rebellion is a Pink Elephants podcast produced by our friends at 3P Studio.